Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking at a stack of sources on a subject that is, let's say, incredibly scrutinized, both historically and ethically.
We're talking about the marriages of Prophet Muhammad.
Exactly. And this isn't going to be just a simple history lesson. We're really going to engage with the most challenging questions, the taboo stuff that critics bring up all the time.
Right. Questions about morality, consent, political power, and the sources we have are pretty unique. They lay out these sharp critiques right alongside detailed Muslim counter-rebuttals.
From all different perspectives, too. Sunni, Shia, modernist.
It's all in there. So our mission here really is to guide you, the listener, through this material. Give you the facts, the context, and the arguments from both sides. We're not taking a side.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're talking about 11 or more unions, but we want to zero in on the most contentious ones and that big overarching question of motivation.
Was it divine authority or human expediency?
Yes. And to even begin to process this, there's a crucial piece of framework you need to have in your mind.
It really is. It's the core tension that defines this whole debate. How you interpret every single marriage, every action, it all hinges on one of two fundamental assumptions.
And those are?
Well, first, do you assume the prophet's actions were divinely guided and therefore justified by a higher purpose we might not fully grasp?
Okay, that's lens number one.
Or two, do you assume they simply reflect 7th century cultural norms? Social strategy, human desire, politics? That one choice divine versus human is what separates every interpretation in all of these sources.
That's a really helpful frame.
Okay,
before we dive into the controversies, let's just lay down the baseline facts, the things everyone agrees on.
All right, so 11 wives in total, 9 were alive when he passed away.
And the most foundational fact, the one that always comes up, is his first marriage.
To Khadijah, it lasted 25 years, and it was completely monogamous.
Right. He was with just one woman who was older than him, a wealthy merchant during his youth.
A critical point. And when you look at his children, this becomes even more significant. All 4 of his surviving daughters were from Khadijah.
And his sons who died young were also with her.
Right.
And here's the kicker, the detail that the defense arguments always come back to.
Mm.
From all those later marriages, all 10 or more wives after Khadijah.
He had only one other son, Ibrahim.
Who also died in infancy. And that was with Maria al-Qibtiyya, who wasn't even a wife in the formal sense. She was a concubine.
So that striking lack of children from the later marriages is a major piece of evidence used to refute accusations about, personal gratification.
It's the starting line for the whole conversation. So let's get into it. The 3 core historical controversies. This is where the ethics really start to clash.
First up is polygamy itself and what critics call special privilege.
Right, numbers.
Exactly. The Quran in Surah An-Nisa explicitly limits Muslim men to 4 wives. So the immediate question is, why did the Prophet marry 11, maybe more?
It looks like hypocrisy. Or at least like he was writing a special exception for himself. A self-serving revelation.
And the response from Islamic scholarship, and this is pretty uniform across the board, Sunni, Shia, everyone, is very structured.
It's not a casual defense.
Not at all. It centers on the concept of special dispensations, or Kani al-Nabi, and they say this is granted to him directly in the Quran.
So this isn't just a loophole they found later.
No, they argue it's a specific designation, that these marriages weren't for personal reasons but had a strategic purpose. First, political alliances. You marry into a tribe, you solidify the community.
Makes sense. What else?
Second, welfare. Marrying the widows of companions who died in battle. In that society, it was a crucial humanitarian act.
And there was a third reason, a legislative one.
Yes. The wives became the mothers of the believers. They were living transmitters of his practice, the Sunnah, especially for private life, for women's issues. They were, in effect, legislative schools.
So the more wives from different backgrounds, the wider the knowledge could be spread. It reframes the motive from personal comfort to public duty.
That's the core of the defense.
Okay, let's move to controversy number 2. And this is, I think, for many, the most difficult one. The age of Aisha.
It is. The traditional sources, especially the most respected Sunni collections like Bukhari, are quite clear. They state the betrothal was at age 6 and the marriage was consummated at 9.
And when you hear that today through a modern lens, the immediate reaction is child abuse, pedophilia.
Of course. The traditional defense has always been one of historical relativism.
Meaning it was the different time.
Essentially, yes. They argue that this was the norm in 7th century Arabia, that puberty, not a specific number, marked readiness for marriage. And crucially, none of his contemporaries, not even his most bitter enemies, ever criticized him for it.
So if it wasn't a moral issue then, Why judge it by our standards now?
That's the argument. But as the sources show, that answer doesn't sit well with a lot of Muslims today.
Right, which is where the revisionist view comes in.
Correct. It's a minority view, but it's robust. These modern scholars argue that the 9-year-old figure might be a miscalculation or a scribe's error.
How do they back that up?
They use other historical data, for instance, calculating her age based on her sister Asma's age, or pointing out that Aisha was present at battles like Badr, which suggests she had to be older, maybe 14, maybe even 19.
So the debate isn't about if it happened, but about what standard of morality you use to judge it. 7th century custom or 21st century ethics.
That's it exactly. Which leads us into the third big one, the marriage to Zainab bint Jahsh.
This one is socially and legally very complex.
Extremely. So Zainab was his cousin, and she was married to his adopted son, Zaid. After they divorced, the Prophet married her.
And the critics immediately point to the timing. It looks very convenient. It broke a huge pre-Islamic taboo, marrying your adopted son's ex-wife.
And then a revelation comes down in Quran 33 that makes it permissible. To a skeptic, it looks like he's using revelation to get what he wants personally.
But the defense, again, is all about the context, the specific social problem this was meant to solve.
Right. In pre-Islamic Arabia, adoption was treated as a blood tie. An adopted son was, legally, the same as a biological son.
Which created all sorts of problems.
Massive problems for inheritance, for marriage, for lineage. The defense across all sects is that this marriage was divinely ordered specifically to shatter that practice, to abolish adoption as bloodline once and for all.
And the Prophet had to be the one to do it, to break the taboo himself.
In the most public way possible. By marrying Zainab, he demonstrated for everyone to see, Zaid is not my biological son, and therefore this taboo no longer applies. It was a radical legal reform.
Some sources also say he hesitated, right?
They do. And apologists point to that hesitation as proof. If this was about personal desire, why hesitate? They argue he was acting under a divine command to do something difficult and socially controversial.
Okay, so we've seen political and legislative reasons, but what about when the power imbalance was, well, absolute? I'm thinking about the wives who came from conflict.
Right, let's shift to that. Power, vulnerability, and consent. We have to talk about the captive wives, Safiya and Juwayriya.
Both were taken as war captives. Safiya's situation was particularly stark. Her father, her husband, they were all killed in the battle against the Muslims.
The critique here is blunt. How can there be meaningful consent in that situation? The power imbalance is just too vast. Critics argue it's coercion, forced conversion, forced marriage.
So what's the defense?
The defense frames it as an act of elevation and mercy. By marrying them, he instantly raised them from the status of a captive slave to an honored mother of the believers.
And in Juwayriya's case, it had a wider effect.
A huge effect. Her marriage directly led to the freedom of her entire tribe. The Prophet's companions saw he had married her and said, "We can't hold the Prophet's in-laws as captives," and they freed everyone. It was seen as a masterstroke of alliance building and mercy.
Then there's the case of Maria al-Qibtiyya. She's different.
Very different. Not a wife, no marriage contract. She was a Coptic Christian slave, a gift from the ruler of Egypt, a concubine.
And the ethical charge is obvious. Doesn't keeping concubines just validate the institution of slavery? How does that square with a higher moral teaching?
And the sources don't dodge this. The defense is pragmatic. They argue that slavery was a universal, deeply embedded institution at the time.
All over the world.
Everywhere. So Islamic law didn't try for an immediate, economically catastrophic abolition. The idea was to regulate it humanely and aim for gradual abolition.
And Maria's the example of that.
That's the argument. She was treated with dignity, not like property. Her son, Ibrahim, was acknowledged and loved. It was, in their view, a strategic compromise with the reality of the era while planting the seeds for future change.
Let's bring this all back to motivation. We said most of these marriages happened after he was 50. The critics say, well, this was about sexual gratification, right?
Especially since most of the marriages produced no children.
Exactly. So what's the counter-argument there?
The consensus defense is really strong here. They always point back to the first 25 years of marriage. Complete monogamy with Khadijah, an older woman, during his physical prime.
The argument being, if he was driven by lust, he wouldn't have done that. He would have married many young women when he was younger.
Precisely. Why wait until you're in your 50s to suddenly marry mostly older widows and build political alliances? It doesn't add up. And the lack of children is presented as the final proof that procreation or pleasure just wasn't the main goal.
It was about caring for women like Sauda or Hafsa, or building ties with powerful figures like Abu Bakr and Umar.
That's the primary explanation offered.
But just because the marriages had a purpose doesn't mean life inside the household was perfect. I mean, the sources are pretty open about the jealousy and conflict.
Oh, very candid. You have the famous honey incident with Aisha and Hafsa. You have other wives complaining through his daughter Fatima that he showed favoritism to Aisha.
And the Quran itself seems to acknowledge that perfect emotional equality is impossible for a man with multiple wives.
It does, but the tradition makes a very sharp distinction here between emotional preference and practical justice.
What's the difference?
The prophet was meticulous about justice in things he could control. Equal time, equal resources, equal provisions. That was the law, and he followed it. His emotional preference for one wife over another was seen as a human reality he couldn't control, but he never let it affect his just treatment of them.
And sometimes revelations came down to manage these very domestic disputes.
Right, which again reinforces that dual role. He's human, dealing with complex family drama, but he's also divinely guided through it.
Let's talk about the constraints on the wives. They get this great honor, mothers of the believers, but they're also forbidden to remarry after he dies.
Which is a significant restriction. The justification was always about protecting the community and his legacy. Imagine the political chaos if a powerful tribal chief married one of his widows, say Aisha, and then claims some kind of special authority through her.
It would have destabilized everything.
It was seen as a necessary price for that elevated status and for the stability of the new community.
And yet, they weren't powerless. Khadijah proposed to him. Salama gave him critical strategic advice at a key moment, the Treaty of Hudaybiyah.
And he took it. So there's this constant tension between the constraints and their agency.
Okay, one last thing. Let's get technical. Critics sometimes apply modern legal standards to these 7th century events and say, where's the proof? Where are the 2 named witnesses for every single marriage contract?
It's an anachronistic demand, really. You can't ask for a notarized document from 1400 years ago. The defense is that these marriages were public knowledge. He taught the rule about needing witnesses, so of course his own marriages followed it.
So how is the legal certainty established then?
It's established by something called kabar al-tawatur.
Mass transmission.
Yes. It means an event reported by so many independent, reliable sources that it's historically impossible they all conspired to invent it. The fact of the marriages is considered definitive historical proof in that system.
So to wrap this all up, what does this synthesis tell us? We've gone through cultural relativism, divine commands, political strategy.
It tells us that this debate is, well, it's basically inescapable.
Yeah.
And where you land depends entirely on that framework we started with.
The 2 lenses.
Exactly. If you assume the revelation is real, his actions are divinely guided, necessary, and justified. If you assume the revelation is a human product, then the marriages become a case study in 7th century power dynamics that just don't measure up to modern moral standards.
So the whole deep dive really shows us it's a clash between 2 timelines, applying our absolute moral code to a past that operated on a completely different set of historical and cultural rules.
And here's maybe a final thought to leave you with. The Prophet's life clearly brought immense reform compared to pre-Islamic Arabia. He limited polygamy, he gave women inheritance rights they never had. So if the goal was gradual reform, was his acceptance of some existing norms like concubinage or certain marriage practices an unavoidable compromise with his time? Or was it a strategic necessity to guide that community forward without breaking it? That's the question the sources leave you to think about.